Welcome back to the Fantasy Hockey Podcast, Unsustainable Wednesdays. I am very, very excited for today's show. There is a lot of big names on here, and there's one that we kind of talked about last time. I was very frustrated with, if you'll remember who that might be. Who could possibly make me frustrated this time of year the most? I don't know. Maybe someone in net? I don't know. He's on the show, and I guess you're just going to have to listen through, watch through to see where he ends up. Another thing, if you usually watch us on YouTube, normally you see our very pretty faces. I actually looked at the camera right now. Usually you see our very pretty faces on this episode, but it was just a long night, and it was easier just to do audio only. So only audio this time, but there's still, so lucky for you. So you'll just have to bear with us as there's player notes and player cards, that kind of thing, which, by the way, if you've never checked out our YouTube and you listen to us on the podcast exclusively, if you ever want a little bit of a different way of enjoying the podcast, go check us out on YouTube. The videos come with little player notes and stuff. So to back up what we've said, or say you want to kind of scrub through and look for a player that maybe you heard on the podcast and see what we had said without really listening fully through, you can go on there and look for what we said. It's really useful. So go on YouTube, search a Fantasy Hockey Podcast, and subscribe. I think it's pretty good content most of the time. And we do live streams. Yay.
We do.
So it helps. Okay, so let's jump right into Unsustainably High here. And my first one is going to be Zach Sanford. Have we not talked about him enough? But I mean, I think we just have to mention what's happening here because it's insane. He is more unsustainable than Vrana was at his peak when he was unsustainable back in the day for low minutes and everything.
Yeah.
Center left wing, 27% owned, 32% shooting over the last 30 days. Yes, 32 consistently over the last 30 days. 104 point pace, mind you, on a lot of inconsistency. On-ice shooting percentage is 15%, which actually isn't as bad as I expected it to be. I expected that to be worse. Now, one of the nice things, and one of the reasons he got picked up so quickly in Bangers Leagues, was because of his hits. His hits pace is way, way up, which is a really funny thing. You don't normally see someone's hit pace go up and their points pace go up like crazy, unless you're Blake Coleman, I guess.
Yeah, well, in his case, it came with minutes mostly, but yeah, Sanford, I don't know. I don't know what else to say about Sanford. He just keeps scoring goals for no reason.
And again, like we've said before in the show, right? Just because someone is unsustainably high doesn't necessarily mean they're bad or that you shouldn't own them. All I'm saying is at some point this is going to fall off, and I'm trying to give you a warning of when that happens. You don't necessarily have to have the longest leash. You can just kind of expect, okay, hold on, he's falling back down to earth. So just keep an eye out for that. Use our in-season tool, that sort of thing, to kind of track, okay, how is the shooting percentage over the last 7 days, that kind of thing. When does it start falling off? That's it.
Yep. So my first one is Joe Pavelski, somebody who's been getting picked up despite the fact he's already 70% owned. He has been really good over the last month, but what we're seeing really is a return to his unsustainable shooting percentage of last season, floating around 20% over the last month. If you pair that with the fact that he's also 70% IPP, which is a little unusual for him, it's not crazy, but I don't think we should be expecting that from him at this point, given his new deployment. He's not doing the same things he was on the Sharks. His on-ice shooting is also kind of high at 13%, but more recently, over the last 2 weeks, is where you really see things kind of take off. His shooting percentage is 24%. He has 100% IPP, so that means he's a part of every single goal that's scored while he's on the ice. His on-ice shooting is still high, and his power play time is just kind of all over the place. He basically plays a little bit more than half the time on the power play, but over the last 2 weeks, he played 60%, and then over the last 2 games, he only played 30%. So I don't really know what to expect from him gaming day in, day out. But what I do know is that all of his assists are coming on the secondary for power play, which makes me worried. And that's actually over the last month, he only has literally two assists on the power play, and they're both secondary, which means he's not really driving the play on the power play so much. Over the year, it's not so bad, but still, I don't really expect any of this pace to keep up. I think we're going to see him slump back down to a 50, 55 point player. Maybe you can take him while he's hot, but I really don't expect it to last too much longer, especially considering he's still not getting a ton of ice time.
Yeah, I agree. I talked about him a little bit in the week preview, and it's pretty much the same message, right? I don't like to trust guys like him where everything is coming from crazy high shooting percentages. And I think one thing I mentioned, not sure if I missed this when you said it, but the crazy thing is that when you look at his normal shooting percentage, it's not far off from his crazy one last year, of 30, 20%, whatever it is. It's not that far off, but it's when you look at his power play shooting percentage and that's where most of his goals are coming from. That's the one that's insane. I mean, he's only scoring on the power play pretty much exclusively. And then you look at it and he has like a 70% shooting on the power play over the last 14 days or whatever it is during this crazy stretch. It's so wildly unsustainable. Okay, my next one here is going to be James Van Riemsdyk, left wing, 29% owned. Now, the funny thing here with him is that his minutes are decreasing a lot recently. I mean, quite a bit. And they just keep decreasing every 7 days that you go back. Yet, over his last 11 games played, he has 23% shooting and 13% on-ice shooting. And somehow that has gotten better as his minutes have decreased. It's normally not how it works. And so with JVR right now, he's relying on a ton of unsustainability. He's doing a lot with a little, quite literally. So I definitely don't expect this to continue from JVR.
Yeah. My next one here is Jacob Chikrin, somebody I actually like a lot. But he's sitting at 47% owned, which I thought was kind of surprising. I know he's had a good stretch here, especially over the last couple of weeks. But typically we don't see... He's had stretches similar to this before, and I feel like we haven't seen the adoption. But he is shooting a lot more. He's hitting a lot more. However, I don't really think there's a whole lot to back up why any of this is happening. He's not seeing a huge increase in minutes. He's not seeing a huge change in deployment or anything. He's still deployed mostly in the defensive zone, actually. He's not seeing a huge increase in power play time. There's really nothing pointing to why all these numbers are increasing. So that makes me a little hesitant. I think we're going to see it go back to where it has been, which is he's a pretty decent peripheral defenseman. He puts up decent shots at like 180 shot pace-ish, which is where I expect him to be. His hits are usually all right. He's basically like a full defenseman, but doesn't really excel at anything. So to see him at, about 100 hit pace, around 120 block pace, and around 180 shot pace, it's kind of what I'd expect from him. Lately, he's been a lot higher than that. Over the last month, he's at 240 shot pace, which is pretty nuts. His hit pace is at 127, and his blocks are a little bit down. But the points is really where it's becoming obvious that something is up. 7 points in his last 7 games. Shooting at 10%, which is insane for a defenseman. He's not a 10% shooter. He was a 4% shooter last season. I don't see why that would change. And he's got a high secondary assist rate, which makes me think all this stuff is going to be coming back down pretty quickly. So I do like him if you're looking for peripherals, but don't expect this point pace to keep up. I still think of him as he's on the season sitting at like a 35 point pace. That's pretty much where I think he belongs, somewhere in the 35 to 40 point range.
Yeah, I almost put Chikrin on here, but I figured you'd have him because I know how much you like Jacob Chikrin, so that's why I left him off, but I agree with everything you said. He's wildly unsustainable. My last one here, because it wouldn't be a hockey show if we don't talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs, of course, right? Zach Hyman, center left wing, 32% owned. Now, I did have him as a long-term target. Remember that. And I do still like him as a long-term target. That being said, you should be cautious of just how much is happening right now with very little. 25% shooting over his last 12 games played. A pretty high IPP as well. And a low power play percentage as of late, 35-ish percent. It went up for a little bit with Nylander out, but now that Nylander's back, that's not positive. Like I said on the week preview, is that his minutes are high. But outside of that, there's really not much else to get super excited for about Zach Hyman, aside from just being on a good line. And when you have more minutes, there's just net more points for him to get in on. And so that's why I like him long-term, is I think there's just going to be more opportunities for him to get points. But I just don't think they'll happen at the rate that they're being given right now to him.
Yeah, I agree. And my last one here, I got to talk about the trade, is Blake Coleman. Left wing, right wing.
It's time.
Tampa, 64%. There's a lot of hype and I feel like this happens anytime a player gets traded from a bad team to a good team. There's always this assumption that the player is better. I'm worried about what'll happen with Coleman here. I don't see him being the same player. I don't see him playing 20 minutes. Why would they play him 20 minutes on that Tampa team? If you decrease the minutes that Coleman gets, I mean, you have him for peripherals mostly. The points are fine, but the peripherals are really the reason why people pick up Blake Coleman. And if you decrease his minutes, you decrease his peripherals for sure. So I think what we're going to see is maybe a slight increase in points, but I think it's going to come at a decrease in shots and hits. So I'm under the impression that overall this will be a net negative for him. I do understand why his percentage is going up because he got traded to Tampa and everybody wants to jump on it. But I am not overly excited about what this means for him. There's a good chance, not a good chance actually. There's a decent chance that I could be wrong about this, but I think this is a losing move for Coleman owners.
Yeah, my take on Coleman is that if you can trade him for virtually anything, I would do it.
I still think his peripherals are going to be okay, just not like top class anymore.
Maybe. I mean, so I think a good comparable perhaps is Chernak, and Chernak's peripherals have started to come back recently, especially since they've been winning. The thing with Coleman that a lot of people forget is he's a defensive player first and foremost. There's a reason that his offensive zone starts are down in the 20s, that he's a defensive player. And when you have a team like Tampa, the reason someone like Coleman is so valuable is that you can run the Kucherovs, the Stammers, the Points, up in the Sorellis, whatever. You can run those pretty offensively and then shift Coleman in, and you have a defensive forward, and you don't need to run the Kucherovs and all that in the defensive zone as often as you did. And so I think that ultimately Coleman will become a specialist, an offensive, well, not offensive. I always confuse this. I always want to say offensive defenseman. And I'm like, wait, that's a completely different possession. Defensive forward. That's the right word. He'll become a specialist that's a defensive forward, and that's where they're going to use him. And I think he's going to excel like crazy. And I think in real life, it's a huge win for Tampa, but I just don't think it translates very much to fantasy. I personally wouldn't gamble on it. I wouldn't trade for it. And if someone came knocking on the door, and remember the rule of touching nice things, if someone wants to come and touch Coleman because he's now on Tampa Bay, by all means, I would listen to any offer that comes my way, especially this time of year. I wouldn't want that risk.
Yep.
So that's sort of my take on that. Okay, so let's move in now to unsustainably low, as long as you don't have anybody else, right? Okay, so we can move on now. So my first one here is a 96% owned player, a center from the Winnipeg Jets in Mark Scheifele, known as a sniper with a super high shooting percentage normally. But if you take a look at his last 12 games played, he has a 3% shooting. If you take a look at the last 14 days, he has 0% shooting. His on-ice shooting percentage has also gone down to 9%, which is pretty low for the Winnipeg Jets. And his IPP is only 41%. The positive thing here is that his power play time on ice, net power play time on ice, and power play percentage are both really high still. And so I expect to turn around at some point for Scheifele. And I think a lot of what has to do here is when you take a look at their 5-on-5 lines, even Blake Wheeler got asked this in an interview recently, they've just been put in a blender. There's not really much consistency there. And so I think that's kind of screwing with Wheeler and Scheifele and Line. That's just screwing with everybody because there's just not as much chemistry being built. And when you have a guy like Hellebuck that's going to stop everything that comes his way, I mean, I guess you can take some liberties and kind of test things out and see if you can get your players going. So I think Scheifele will totally turn it around, and I wouldn't be too afraid of. I wouldn't be too afraid in the sense of I wouldn't sell, and I wouldn't be afraid of buying if the price were right.
Yep. All right, my first one here is Dominic Kubalik, left wing, right wing, 33%. He's actually doing pretty well lately, but he's still getting dropped anyway. He has 3 points in his last 3 games, and there was a bit of a stretch where he wasn't doing a lot. But there's a lot of things that I like about this. We saw his ice time dip for a while, which was always a concern with Kubalik. Kind of feels like Vrana to bring him up again for some reason, but that ice time has changed, and the reason for that is that he's showing up on top power play now, which is what makes me excited about him. While he's playing top power play, I like him a lot more. I was viewing Kubalik basically as like a 55-point guy-ish when he was on top line with no power play. I think that power play gets him 10 to 15 point pace or so that sticks him right around 65 to 70. That's a pretty good spot for him to be in. But this is, of course, all tied to how long he can stay on top power play. And if he's not able to produce on there quickly, it probably won't be very long. But the shots are there. You know, he's fired 9 shots on the power play in the couple of chances he's gotten on it. He's got back to it. He's on a 300 shot pace over his last week, which includes 4 different games. So he's shooting. His ice time's up. He's on the power play. His offensive zone starts are super high. There's a lot of things to like about what's going on with Kubalik's game right now. I've actually picked him up in a handful of leagues because I think that he could be a breakout for this week. It's just a matter of what happens on that power play.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the proper take. And we've obviously had him on unsustainably high for a while. But like you said, the power play 1 is a huge deal. And if he can stick that, then he now becomes both unsustainably low, but also sustainably high, at least from a do we like him or not perspective.
Yep.
But he does have quite a few levers that you can point to that say, okay, if this drops off or this falls off a little bit, he's all of a sudden not relevant. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing with him, which actually makes him pretty easy to know whether to hold or not. Okay. My next one here is another guy that we love a lot, and that's Brian Rust, left wing, right wing, 78% owned. Shooting pace is still insane. Minutes are still insane. He has a 0% IPP and on ice shooting percentage in the last 5 games. Literally nothing is going in around Brian Rust. Nothing. He's not putting it in. The people around him aren't putting it in. Nothing is happening. And yet he's playing 21 minutes a game. This is insanity. I mean, I would be worried if the minutes were coming down or if he wasn't getting as many opportunities anymore. Then I'd be worried. The fact that his minutes have actually gone up means I think that the Pens aren't really worried about this in the sense of, you know what, he's still playing well. Give him the minutes. Things will come. I actually am going to try to target Rust. I don't know if this is going to work now because I'm saying it on the podcast. Oh, actually, this will come out after my trade deadlines, I think. So I could say this. I'm going to try to target Rust. I guess it might not help other people who trade deadlines have passed. Whatever. Brian Rust is someone that I would probably try to target, and if he's dropped, pick up, because I think that, especially if you're towards the top of the table, he's someone that if it clicks and he's playing 21 minutes a night on the Pittsburgh Penguins and things actually get figured out, you're going to be looking at a real good player with incredible upside.
Yeah, I agree. I thought about putting Russ on here, but this is the one where I thought you'd take him. So,
yep.
I'll move in my next one, who you may have also taken, and that's Ilya Kovalchuk.
I did take him.
Left wing, right wing. There's nothing not to like about what's going on right now except for the points. He's at 32% ownership. People are dropping him. The peripherals have been unbelievable lately. On the month, he's sitting at over a 3-shot per game pace, which is great. His hits are much higher than usual for him, but also very good, even above the increase that we've seen since he came to Montreal over the last couple of weeks. So everything on this chart that I'm looking at here, the thing to point at is his on-ice shooting is hilariously low. It's like 5% over his last 4 games, 8% over the last month, and his IPP, his goal share, essentially his point share of each goal scored while I was on the ice, is also very low over that time. It's kind of similar to Brian Rust, except some goals are being scored, and he's just kind of not managing to be on them at the moment. But I don't really see anything pointing to why that should be the case. Over the last 2 weeks, he's shooting at a 300-plus shot pace. He's got plenty of power play time. I think we're going to see the points come right back. The funny thing is, the point pace I gave for Kovalchuk was like hilarious at the beginning of the season. I called him for 67-point pace. I actually like him right around there, right around 65 to 70-point pace. Ever since he came to Montreal, I don't see any reason why that should be slowing down right now. I think he's a good target, but Montreal has kind of a weird schedule for the playoffs, so pay attention if you're thinking about using him for your playoff run, and just see how he kind of meshes with the rest of your team and whether he's going to cause benching issues or what the deal is.
Yeah, I ended up dumping him actually in a few leagues. And the only reason was because I dumped him, and he's still in the wire.
Yeah.
Mostly I figured that, you know what, he's 32% owned. He's been doing all the crazy stuff he's doing, and he's still lowly owned. People clearly aren't paying attention. So I didn't want to take that risk on. And I just jumped him because I figured, you know what, he's going to sit on the wire. And guess what? He has. So that's it. That's my only counterpoint to him, is while I think he's worth it, I also think that he's very underrated and people don't really buy into him. And so if, say, he's your worst forward and he's the one sacrificing you starts, I don't hate the idea right now of dropping him, picking up someone who's hot or will help you win a week or something, and then grabbing him later, because odds are you will be able to.
Yep.
So that's my little counterpoint there. Okay, my last one here, is because you took Kovalchuk, is going to be Torrey Krug. Defenseman, 97% owned. A lot of things just weird. His power play percentage is still really high, and what's more impressive is his shots are sky high lately. Just insanely high. It's stuff you normally don't see from Torrey Krug, and I'm ecstatic to see that. His on-ice shooting percentage is only 5% on a Bruins team that should have a higher on-ice shooting percentage than 5%. So that's one area that's hurting him. This is over the last 7 games played, by the way. And his IPP is 33%. So when you look at his last 7 games played and you think, oh my God, you open up Yahoo, and in that little card, you see the last 7 games, like, man, Torrey Krug is in bad. It's pretty unsustainable. It's all been kind of the Bruins not playing well while he's on the ice, him not being involved in those points that were on the ice, or what did happen while he was on the ice. And so as soon as that kind of turns around, he'll go back to being right to normal, to where you expected him to be.
Yeah. Yep.
Just don't freak out about him.
Not freaking out. Although I don't think I've ever owned Torrey Krug, weirdly enough.
I don't think you have. I've owned him a few times. I'm a big fan of Torrey Krug. The thing is, I feel like when I used to draft him, he would go proper value. And now I feel like he goes just a little bit too high. Like he goes amongst the Yosis and that kind of thing, but he doesn't carry any of the peripherals that those guys do. And so I normally don't like touching Krug at that area. I like him maybe 2 rounds behind those guys, where the non-peripheral guys start to go.
Yep. All right, my last one here is Kevin Fiala. Left wing, right wing, 37%. He kind of seems similar to Kubalik, where he's honestly been fine, but people are just dropping him. He's 2 games removed from a 3-point game, and he's starting to see drops. And I just kind of want to pump the brakes a bit. His ice time is still basically the highest it's ever been for him. Like these are like career high ice time numbers lately. His point pace has been great. His shots have been great. His power play percentage has been great. He as far as Minnesota goes, you don't really get much beyond about 50, 55%, and that's where he's been. There's nothing to dislike about him right now. His on-ice shooting is sustainable. His IPP is 100%, so okay, that's going to come down a bit. But funny thing about Fiala, even last season, he was a 74% IPP guy, which is really high. So I don't see anything here that makes me think he's going to drop off significantly. And I think he could actually be a pretty decent target if he can keep this ice time in deployment. That's the big question. He needs to keep his ice time. So he's one of those guys, if you start seeing him play 16, 15, 14 minutes a game, that's when you start thinking about dropping. If he's playing 18 to 20 minutes a game, he's worth holding. Usually.
I like that. I didn't expect to hear Fiala on here, but...
Me neither, but the guy is shooting like 4 shots a game consistently for like a while now. So...
Love to see it.
Yeah.
Do you have any more on Unsustainably Low?
I do not.
Okay, so let's move into Sustainably High now. Who are the guys that keep doing? I only have 2 here, but I feel pretty good about them. So my first one is Christian Dvorak. Center left wing, 21% owned. The one thing that does give me pause is his shooting. He's a 23% shooting over his last 30 days. But the nice thing is that his on-ice shooting percentage and IPP are right in line. So the only thing that needs to come down a bit is goals. I don't mind that at all. If the IPP and on-ice shooting percentage are good, I feel good about that. And the thing is, the reason I feel good about that is because his ice time has gone up pretty consistently in the recent games. So it used to be more like the 15, 16-ish range. Now it's going up to like 17, 18s pretty consistently. And so for that reason, when your on-ice shooting percentage and your IPP is in line and you get more minutes, that just means that there's going to be more goals that you can get in on net, right? From an IPP perspective, you're going to be on the ice. You have more opportunities to be on the ice for more goals. And so for that reason, I like him as sustainably high right now. But if those minutes come down, I would swap this and say he's probably unsustainably high, to be honest.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with that one. But we're agreeing too much on this one, but
I know, it's weird. We haven't had an episode, I feel like, in a while where we've agreed on almost everything.
Yeah. My next one is, my first one is Kyler Yamamoto. Right wing, 32%. I've been talking about him for a bit. He played 22 minutes in his last game. Just kind of reflect on that for a minute. I think it was either last week or the week before that Yamamoto was sitting at unsustainably high for me, and that was because of ice time and because of no power play exposure. And literally both of those things have changed with McDavid injury. And I've already mentioned this in the past, but I think even with McDavid back, that there's a decent chance Yamamoto is going to stay on power play 1. 32% seems low. I'm surprised that he's still that low. With his ice time and his power play time, I think he's still one of my favorite ads, and he's got a very good playoff schedule as far as off nights and start count. So
yeah, he
was
was available in my points league that values points more than anything else, which I was shocked by. I did not expect that. I think maybe one thing that gives a lot of people pause is the right wing only. I think that still makes people a little more hesitant.
I don't care.
I mean, the reason I didn't care, so I was sitting there thinking, and I was like, you know what? I have Buchnevich, who right now I'm not going to drop, and I have Pasternak. So that gives me a little bit of issues going into playoffs. Like, I have 2 single right wings. If I drop, and I was going to drop Kovalchuk, like, well, that's a left wing, right wing. And I ended up doing it, one, because, I mean, obviously, Yamamoto over Kovalchuk in a points league, but also the reason is because if you take a look at the playoff schedule, the Edmonton Oilers have an insane playoff schedule. Yep. every single week, at least for my playoffs, which I kind of want to look up. You might hear my keyboard here, apologies, but I really want to find this because I want to tell you when my playoffs are, so that you can compare, because it's blew me away, and this is why I rushed to grab Yamamoto. So my playoff weeks are week 22, week 23, and week 24. So that's March 9th through April 4th. Every single one of those weeks, Yamamoto has 3 off nights. Every single one.
Pretty good.
So you're talking about, who cares that he's right wing only? You're getting 3 net games out of Yamamoto in those weeks.
Yep.
And so then when I compared him to Kovalchuk, for example, or even Suzuki, I was thinking about, I was like, well, they don't have a good schedule.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have many net games in general over those days. Yamamoto's a huge ad. I mean, he could be one of the, I don't want to put some kind of hyperbole here, but he could be one of the best ads going into the playoffs in general.
Yep, I think so too.
I think he's the best or top 3.
Mm-hmm.
UC Saros could be another one. Could end up being another one if he actually steals the net and does well. I'm trying to think of who the third one is here. I had another one kind of lined up that I really like. But to be honest, I can't remember who it is. But those definitely are 2 of my favorites if everything kind of pans out properly.
Yep.
Okay. So for my last one here, I said I had 2. My last one here is a New York Ranger, Ryan Strome, center right wing, 66% owned. The interesting thing about him is that he's available in a few of my leagues, and I feel like it's because owners at the top who had him got frustrated during that little stretch and then dropped him. So he might be, even though he's 66% owned, he might be available in your league, so it's worth checking. Minutes are back up consistently to around 20 to 21 plus. Now, is that because they actually want him playing that much, or is it because he's being showcased for a trade? I guess we'll find out. But nonetheless, shooting percentage has actually been very, very low, and yet he's crushing it from a points perspective. His on-ice shooting percentage is in line, and his power play percentage is still high at like the 65 to 70 mark. So I love Ryan Strome right now, as long as he's continued to do what he does. And it seems like the pivot point for Ryan Strome is when he plays less than 20 minutes. He ends up on kind of a crappier line. When he plays above 20 minutes, he does well. That's kind of how it seemed to be all season so far. There's obviously occasional moments where he plays less than 20, it's fine. But it seems to be this pivot point where at 20 really changes the line mates or the deployment that he gets.
Yeah, I don't know what the deal with that is, but
maybe it's power play, honestly. It might be more power play time net.
That probably helps.
Not
that
sure
always
exactly.
helps.
Yeah.
Speaking of power play time, my next one here is Andrei Burakovsky. Left wing, right wing, 52%. Power play 1, top line. He's another guy, just like Yamamoto, was showing up as unsustainably high very recently because no power play 1, no ice time. And of course, just to make me put my foot in my mouth, both those things change, and everybody's going to be like, I knew Burakovsky was good 2 weeks ago when he was playing 11 minutes and getting 2 assists like every game. It's like, no.
That's a great vote.
Yeah.
That's a great voice.
Like, I know, right? My mocking myself voice. But yeah, there's things have changed fundamentally for Burakovsky in a good way for him, in a bad way for Landeskog. Although it looks like we're recording this on Monday night. Mikko Rantanen, that injury didn't look good. And I'm under the impression the top line is probably going to look like it's probably going to be Burakovsky shifting to the right, and we're going to see Landeskog, Landeskog, McKinnon, Burakovsky.
Is there a plane in the background of someone coming to yell at you about Burakovsky?
Probably.
Yeah, that's what it is. Someone's coming through.
Everyone, yeah. I mean, just check Twitter. But yeah, so 52% is actually pretty low for him, and considering what he's been doing lately, he barely made the cut for what I'm actually not really. This isn't a pickup candidate necessarily. He's a sustainably high guy, so I like him as long as he get this deployment, and it seems like it's going to be longer. Well, definitely longer now than it may have been without the Rantanen injury, depending on how that goes.
Yeah, I mean that Rantanen injury is going to be really interesting to see.
Yeah,
it didn't look good though.
Didn't look good.
It did not look good. Okay. Wait, you have any more?
I do. I got one left.
Sustainably high. Okay, so you can take your last.
My last one is Victor Olofsson. Left wing, right wing, 59%. If you were confused or concerned or whatever about Olofsson, because we got a lot of questions about what to do with Olofsson when he came back, play him. I would. The 2 notable candidates that came back recently are Victor Olofsson and Anthony Mantha. Olofsson is the guy easily. In the vast majority of, I can't even think of a league that I'd prefer Mantha in. So 59% owned for Olofsson. I think he's a 75-point pace player with good power play upside and a goal first guy. Hard to find. He should be higher than 59% owned for sure. Now I'm done.
Yeah, I'm shocked he's that lowly owned still, honestly.
Yep.
It's crazy. I mean, we talked about him on the week preview as well. I had said something about him being long-term, and I was shocked that he was only 55%. It's crazy. Okay, a lot of people gave up on him. So let's move on to Sustainably Low, the section everyone's been waiting for. My first name here is going to be not who you thought it was going to be, if you guessed properly. I'm going to start with Alex DeBrincat, left wing, right wing, 87% owned. His minutes are down in the 14s, 15s. He's not getting as many peripherals. There's a lot of bad things are happening here. And quite frankly, he's not worth holding, especially going into the playoffs. I think we've had a long enough time to, one, and there's two things that are big on Alex DeBrincat, in my opinion, that make me think a streamer spot is better going into playoffs. So one is that I think we've had enough time now to realize that his shooting percentage is not going to come back to the levels of last year. That's the number one big important thing, in my opinion. The second most important thing here is that the peripherals are also not coming back. And the only reason to hold Alex DeBrincat, if he's not getting points, were the peripherals. And those are also now gone. And so now you're looking at virtually, I guess, the decline of a young player in fantasy perspectives. It's similar to Jamie Benn a few years ago. That's who he reminds me of. Mixed with Pavelski, strangely, because of the shooting percentage. But anyways, in my opinion, Alex DeBrincat just at this point is sustainably low, not really worth it. Especially the shallower you go. I mean, even at 12 person now, I don't think he's really worth holding. He's got to be one of your worst forwards, in my opinion, at this point, given how low how many minutes he's playing, how inconsistent he's been. It's hard to justify holding him over a streamer.
Yeah, I agree. Most cases
sucks, but yeah.
My first one,
he was a keeper for some people.
Yep. My first one
sucks.
Arguably shouldn't even be here, but he also shouldn't be 15% owned, and that's why he's here. Is Rasmus Sandin? Come on, guys. He hasn't done anything since the big. He got 2 assists in his first game or whatever it was, and everybody lost their minds. And he got added a bunch of times, and people started calling him must-adds, and I don't know what was going on, but he's been playing like 11 to 15 minutes a game and hasn't been doing anything. Surprise, surprise. Like, there's not a whole lot he can be doing in that amount of ice time. And without being power play 1, there's not a whole lot to like, even about power play deployment in Toronto. So I don't know why he's 15% owned. I get that's kind of low, but he shouldn't even be there. He should be at 0. So he should be dropped. If you own him, you should drop him for anything.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, my next one here is going to be okay. Now you guys all get to hear it. Sustainably Low, Sergei Bobrovsky.
Oh boy, here we go. Replay the clip. From you saying he's the second best fantasy goalie in the beginning of the year. And I was like, wait, we shouldn't worry about him being on the new team. And you're like, no.
Yeah. Here's the thing. So there's not two theories in goaltending, but I think there's 2 elements to goaltending. There's the actual goaltender themselves and how well they play, how good are they, and then there's the element of the system around them and how much does the system allow that goaltender's talent to flourish, right? I think a good example of this in both counterpoints is one, you see Elvis, right? Honestly, from a scouting perspective, a lot of people have never seen him as that great of a goaltender. If you read the scouting reports when he was going to come over, they were like, he's good, but he's not anything incredible. And yet the Columbus Blue Jackets system allowed both his talents and just allowed him to be even better than he was. And then you see a guy like Hank on the flip side, right? Henrik Lundqvist, or you even look at like Georgiev or Shesterkin recently. The system sucks, does not help them, and yet their talents kind of overcome those issues, right? And that also happens occasionally. And with goaltenders like that, like with Hank, for example, you see a fall off pretty hard at some point because you're relying so much on your talent to get you through the troubles of your defense. In the situation of Bobrovsky, it's a mix of both of those things not being true. It's a mix of him not playing well in certain situations while also playing very, very well. So, when you talk about the eye test, Bobrovsky is a player to me that more than often passes the eye test. He plays incredibly well. The problem is that the system doesn't help him at all. If you look at the hockey viz graphs of where shots come from for the Florida Panthers, they are all in the crease still. And if you remember back to I don't know. Must have been week 3 or week 4. We were talking about this with the Panthers. And I was like, it's insane. Literally, it's bright, bright red in the center of the crease. And that's not good for a goaltender. Those are the hardest shots to stop. Those are the highest expected goal percentage shots. And at the time I said, you know what? They'll probably figure this out. It's a new coach. They'll figure it out. They're going to get better. There's no way that the coaching staff can look at this and say, you know what? This is okay. And yet, it is about to be March. Okay, we're halfway through February, so let's calm down there. It's not almost March, but we're close. But we're almost there, and they haven't fixed jack squat. So
Jack squat.
now, jack squat, yep. So at this point, I've got to assume this is who the Florida Panthers are. In which case, this is who Bobrovsky's going to be. And the only reason to hold Bobrovsky rest of season is for upside. Oh my God, maybe he's going to turn it around and be the Vezina goaltender we're all waiting for. I don't see it. I don't see how that's going to happen behind this defense. I don't care if Bob went God mode. I don't see how it's going to happen. What's really crazy is, so if you take a look at Bobrovsky's numbers last year, if you look at his goals against and his expected goals against, and you subtract the two, how many goals did he let in more than expected? Last year, he let in 20 goals more than what was expected of him. Okay? Last year. He let in 20 goals more than expected. What do you think the number is this year? So far,
I have no idea.
It's only 22.
But last year was the whole season. We're only like 60 games in or something.
Well, but it's also relative, right? If you're supposed to let in more goals and then you also stop more, like your expected goals increase, your expected goals against increases along with your actual goals against. So yeah, he can get worse, but it does increase.
Yeah, but it would still be cumulative. You're not
together
over one game. You'd only get like what, on a bad game, you'd have like 3 goals against more than you should have. You wouldn't wind up at 20.
I mean, yes, fair enough. I mean, last year he played 74 games, right? So there's a big difference in games played. But still, it is still insane to me that with how bad Bobrovsky is playing, the difference between his goals against and expected goals against is only 22 goals. I would have expected that to be significantly higher.
We'll see where it is at the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, his goals against average has increased like crazy compared to last year. And part of that, I think goals against average, especially normally, has to do a lot with system more than it has to do with the goaltender itself. So the fact that goals against average went from 2.7 last year to 3.3 this year, that's his goals against average, folks. So in my opinion, Bobrovsky at this point is not really worth holding, simply for the fact that, like, the upside's not there. The only reason to hold Bobrovsky is for upside. And unless you count wins a ton and saves a ton and you don't really care about goals against, then sure, in that kind of league, he's worth it. For example, in my points league, he's ranked like 2 something, which honestly is not as bad as I thought he'd be. But that's my counter rant of Bobrovsky, that it sounds now very different from... and look, here's what I've learned. So what have we learned from this? We'll talk about this probably again next preseason, but what have I learned from this Bobrovsky fiasco? I think the number one thing I've learned, and that I don't think, especially now in today's NHL, we don't ascribe enough importance to, is the system around the goaltender. And I think that if I would have gone back and looked much better at Quenneville's numbers under Chicago, I would have noticed, you know what, they actually were not that great of a defensive team under Quenneville there either. So that's the mistake I made. So I'll own up to it. I'm completely wrong. And it sucks because I love watching Bob play still. He's still playing really well. But he also does make stupid mistakes, to be fair. And on top of that, the system just doesn't help him. You can't make mistakes in a system like Florida's. So there you go.
Wow.
Okay.
All right. Okay, my next one.
Rant of the day
is
yours.
Jake DeBrusk. Left wing, right wing,
Yep.
40%. Ice time's dipping, shots are dipping, power play time never seems to matter for him. So he was fun when his ice time was up and he was shooting a lot, but we're kind of back to standard DeBrusk stuff, and 40% feels high. I don't really see it coming back unless his ice time comes back up, which I don't know. If they're decreasing his ice time, they're doing it for a reason. So he'll have to earn that back, and you can wait for that to happen before you need to own him again.
Yeah, agreed. Wow, that was a quick one. You don't really like DeBrusk, so I'm not surprised.
I like that he's playing with a hole in his stick, but besides that.
Yeah, the hole in the stick is the best part, but I mean, it's not working now, so I don't know if I like the hole in the stick anymore.
Slingshot.
Yeah. Oh, I've got a really fun one for my last one. You're going to love this.
Is it Bobrovsky again?
I mean, I thought about it, but no. I should just do that whole thing over and see if it's as consistent as he is. No. Oh, I accidentally pressed the on-air button. My bad. My last one here is John Gibson.
Yep.
Sustainably low. That's it. And honestly, a lot of the same reasons as Bob. Although Bob, what happened with Gibson is actually kind of like Hank, where carried the team on his back. Last year, saved 22 goals above expected. And this year, he's negative 14. So he's let in 14 more goals than expected. So after years of carrying the team on his back, this year, he's actually just kind of playing average. He's actually just above average goaltender. What really kills him in most leagues is his goals against average of 2.99. Not that he had a great one last year, but now he has a couple of bad goals against average with an average save percentage, with bad wins. Just not worth it. The upside isn't there. And for that reason, like, to me, Gibson is, again, another goaltender where, I probably would rather have Korpisalo, honestly. I mean, once he's healthy, probably. And here's the other thing, too, that's interesting is, for example, I see a lot of people saying, I've seen a lot of questions, like trade questions and stuff, where people are holding 4 goalies or trying to figure out their goalie situation, and they count wins, goals against average, save percentage, but they still have Gibson. And to me, picking up a goaltender is not going to fix your Gibson issue. Your issue is Gibson.
Yep.
So, in my opinion, you'd probably be better off dropping Gibson for a skater, running 2 goaltenders, and you gain 2 skater spots pretty much. And your save percentage and goals against average actually probably gets better. And it's not like you're really losing out on wins with Gibson. It's not like he's getting many of those. So, yeah, that's kind of my take on Gibson. I just don't think he's worth it anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And they're moving into a little bit more of a split start thing. And that hasn't been great for him.
Well, I don't know if they're going to keep doing that after Miller got just destroyed by Calgary, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, they're both kind of getting destroyed every once in a while. So,
yeah. All right, my last one is Philip Deneau. Standing at 33%. He's a streaky player, so when he goes on a cold streak, he doesn't really put up anything that makes him worth owning through it. So when he's hot, you can grab him. When he's cold, he's just cold. And I think you can give up on him until the next time he heats up again. The big problem with him is if you're holding on to him during a cold streak, you're not getting peripherals either because he doesn't really put those up. That's the big reason why he winds up on this list at 33%.
Oh man, well that was a fun show. I think, I don't know, fun for some, not so fun for others. Yeah, I mean, you had to listen to me babble. I don't know if that's very fun for you, but maybe. So let us know what you think of our Bob take, and I'm gonna guess, based on just last episode, a lot of people had a lot of Bob questions. So if you're watching on YouTube, if you have a Bob question, you can comment below and I'll get to it. If on Twitter, you can also mention us on Twitter. We'll help you with your Bob issues. This is, I think I'm just going to start a whole new segment on the podcast for like the next 3 weeks. It's just going to be called Bob Issues. And we're going to talk about people who write in with Bob issues. Brandon hates that idea. That's why he's silent. So I'm just going to end this show here and move on. So thank you for listening. We will see you for the weekend preview.
Yep. Thanks for listening.